The first strategy we are going to use today when talking about double-digit multiplication is the break-apart method. In this method, we take one of our larger numbers and break it apart to make two different multiplication problems. Let's break apart the sample that we see here in front of us. We have 45 as one of our factors. Can I make 45 into two smaller numbers by breaking it apart? I can. In this case, I would break 45 into 40 and 5. When I add 40 and 5 together, I end up with 45. Now I'm going to multiply each of these parts with my other factor, which is a 7. So 40 times 7, and then I have 5 times 7. Now because I broke it apart, I now need to put it back together. In order to do this, I'm going to use addition. Now I am ready to multiply. 40 times 7 is 280. We can easily find that out by doing 7 times 4 is 28. But then we need to add in the 0 because it's not a 4, but it's a 40. So 280. Plus the product of 5 times 7. If we know our basic facts, then we know 5 times 7 is 35. I can now add these two parts of my problem. 280 plus 35. When I add them together, I will get the answer to my original problem. So 45 times 7 equals 315. Let's now look at an example of using the break-apart method if we have a two-digit factor multiplied by another two-digit factor. Let's look at the example 34 times 78. If you remember in class, when we got to this, we talked about a pattern that we can use. It was tens to tens, tens to ones, ones to tens, and ones to ones. So let's look at what that looks like when we use numbers. Let's start with tens to tens. So I need to multiply the value of our 3 in our first factor, which is 30, times the value of the 7 in the second factor, which is 70. Now let's go to our second, tens and ones. So again, I'm multiplying the tens in my first factor by the ones in my second. When we go to our third set, we are now going to the ones place in our first factor, multiplied by the tens place in our second factor. And remember, it's the value of the digit, so it's times 70. And lastly, we have the ones in our first factor times the ones in our second factor. Now, as with the problem earlier, after we broke it apart, we had to put it back together. And again, we used adding to solve that. And now, using our multiplication skills, we can figure out each of these partial products. 30 times 70 would be 2,100 plus 30 times 80 would be 240. 4 times 70 would be 280. And lastly, 4 times 8 would be 32. Let me rewrite these in a column up at the top of the screen. And 32. So I get my answer of 2,652. This is the break apart method for multiplication. We can use this for larger numbers, but it becomes more difficult. In the next tutorial, I will show you an easier way to organize this to make it a little bit easier.